a young jockey George Stubbs. The very name of this medium suggests its qualities. Fluid and translucent, watercolor paint is ideal for pale washes and ambiguous shifts of color. An understated medium, it is halfway between drawing and painting, making it ideal for outdoors, hence its use in English landscape. Origins and influences. Watercolor has a long history in England. During the Tudor period, miniaturists, such as Nicholas Hilliard, used gouache, opaque watercolor, for its jewel-like brilliance, while in the 1630s, portraitist Van Dyck spent his spare time sketching the landscape in watercolors. The diarist Samuel Pepys dabbled in watercolor in the 1640s, but it wasn't until 1784, when Reeves, still renowned today for artists' materials, created watercolor cakes, that the medium became easily portable for outdoor use. Subjects. Landscapes were the main subject matter for English watercolourists, who were divided into two groups. In the 18th century, military draftsmen, such as Paul Sandby, recorded scenes in a map-like way. Their topographical approach was used before the advent of photography to produce accurate representations of natural and artificial features. The other group featured artists such as Alexander Cozens and John Cotman, who highlighted imaginative and poetic qualities as opposed to topographical function. Tension between the two camps was high. The topographers criticized Cozens' textbooks on the picturesque in his blot landscape methods, see below, while the picturesque painters thought the work of the topographers was far too conservative. Techniques. The partnership between the water, paint, and paper makes this medium unlike any other. With oils, the paint stays put. Watercolor swims across the paper. Unlike other artists, watercolorists obey unwritten rules. For example, some do not use black or white paint. So for white, they let the paper show or use a technique called stopping out, blotting color while the paint is still wet. Turner, on the other hand, scraped out whites with his fingernail when the paint had dried. Landscape painters raised the status of watercolor. They founded the Old Watercolour Society in 1804 and made paintings of such quality they rivaled oil paintings. English watercolourists. Alexander Cozens. B. Russia, 1717. D. London, 1786. Alexander Cozens is regarded as one of the leading watercolourists of the 18th century and one of the first important British painters to focus exclusively on landscapes. His work helped to propel landscape art to the fore, by presenting it from a subjective, imaginary viewpoint. This poetic approach ultimately culminated in the Romantic style of the 19th century. Born in Russia, where his father was working as a shipbuilder, but educated in Britain, Cozens later studied landscape under Claude Joseph Vernet in Rome. On his return to Britain, he worked as a drawing master and teacher while developing his theories on landscape painting. Cozens devised a technique called blot drawing, which he developed from one of Leonardo da Vinci's ideas. He used randomly placed blots on the drawing paper to fire his imagination, developing them into imaginary landscapes. He expounded on this in his 1786 treatise, a new method of assisting the invention in drawing original compositions of landscape. Classical landscape Cozens' work was executed almost exclusively in monochrome wash. He used contrasting areas of light and dark to suggest nature's power and inscrutability. Mid-18th century, sepia on paper, 17 by 21 centimeters, Farron's Art Gallery, Hull, UK. Fantastic landscape Cozens identified 16 landscape themes and 27 viewing situations, such as times of day or types of weather, that could be used to produce poetic depictions of landscape. Cent 1780-85, wash with pencil on paper, 40x53 cm, Yale Center for British Art, New Haven, US. John Robert Cozens. B. London, 1752, D. London, 1797. John Robert Cozens was described by John Constable as the greatest genius that ever touched landscape. He studied under his father, Alexander Cozens, but developed a more naturalistic, yet highly evocative and atmospheric style. His watercolors proved hugely influential with British landscape artists for several generations to come. Cozens held his first exhibition of drawings in 1776 at the Society of Artists. He made two extensive painting trips to continental Europe in 1776–79 and 1782–83, discovering in the Alps and the Italian countryside the inspirational subject matter that was to profoundly influence his art. His brooding paintings of weather, clouds, and mountains presaged the work of artists such as Thomas Girtin and J.M.W. Turner. Cozens' art often had a melancholic air, probably because he suffered from severe depression. This led to insanity and death at 45. Nevertheless, the poetic vision of his later paintings, such as View of Windsor from the Southwest, 1792, surpassed that of any of his contemporaries in English landscape art. Best known, South Tyrol here, Cozens brilliantly captures the haunting grandeur and mystery of alpine scenery in a way that inspires the imagination of the viewer. The low-toned combinations of gray, blue, and green watercolor add to the atmosphere. Sent 1782–83, Watercolour on Paper, University of Liverpool Art Gallery, UK. Thomas Girtin. B. London, 1775, D. London, 1802. Considered the equal of Constable and Turner in his own field, Thomas Girtin was known for his innovative watercolor landscapes, and he played a central role in establishing the medium as a major art form. Girtin's early works were in the 18th century topographical style, but he later developed a bolder technique, which evoked a sense of space and mood and made a lasting impression on English landscape painting. Girtin made several sketching tours of Britain and by 1799 had attracted eminent patrons, including the art collector Sir George Beaumont. He was also a friend of J.M.W. Turner. As boys they had both been employed to color engravings for a printseller. Lifeline. 1775, born in London, 1794 begins to exhibit at the Royal Academy, 1800 marries Mary Ann Bowart, 16-year-old daughter of a London goldsmith, 1801–02 visits Paris to make a series of etchings, which are published posthumously, 1802 his huge London panorama, Ido Metropolis, is exhibited. Dies aged just 27 from tuberculosis. Lyme Regis, Dorset. Girtin painted this view during a sketching tour of the West Country. Here he displays the bolder style he had developed, with its use of broad washes of strong color. See 1797, Watercolor over pencil on textured paper, 22x43 cm, Yale Center for British Art, New Haven, US. Tom Girtin had lived, should have starved. J.M.W. Turner, 1775–1851. The White House at Chelsea. Girtin painted two versions of this scene, which show his mastery of watercolor and his increasing power as an artist. This view of the Thames at sunset brilliantly creates a mood of peace and reflection. 1800, Watercolor on Paper, 31x51 cm, private collection. Closer look. White light here. Girtin has magically captured the effect of the setting sun lighting up the White House by leaving the paper virtually unpainted. He has added yellow as a contrast. John Sell Cotman. B. Norwich, 1782, D. London, 1842. A landscape painter and etcher, John Sell Cotman was virtually self-taught, yet by the age of 18 he was already exhibiting at the Royal Academy. He left his hometown of Norwich in 1798 to study in London. Between 1800 and 1806, he made several sketching trips to Yorkshire and Wales, and some of his works from this period are ranked among the best English landscape paintings of their time. In 1806, Cotman returned to Norwich, where he exhibited with the Norwich Society of Artists and also taught. He later worked as an architectural draftsman, eventually returning to London in 1834. Greta Bridge, Durham. This is probably Cotman's most famous work, and is typical of the watercolors he produced while visiting the area. It is made up almost entirely of controlled, flat washes of cool color. C. 1805, Watercolour, British Museum, London, UK. David Cox. B. Birmingham, 1783, D. Birmingham, 1859. Son of a Birmingham blacksmith, the landscape painter David Cox became one of the leading British watercolourists of his era. Indeed, in 1852 a report in the Spectator magazine declared that, "In his work there are power and insight enough to swamp all the others put together." Cox started his career as an apprentice to a painter of miniatures, and also worked as a theatrical scene painter. In 1804, he moved to London, where he began exhibiting at the Royal Academy, combining his art career with teaching. Between 1826 and 1832, Cox made several sketching trips to mainland Europe. From 1844, he also made regular visits to North Wales, where he produced some of his most celebrated watercolour landscapes. View in North Wales painted during his final trip to North Wales. When his eyesight was beginning to fail, this watercolour is typical of Cox's lively style. It shows a drover driving cattle across a bridge amid the rugged Welsh scenery. 1858, watercolour. On paper, 52x 75 centimeters, private collection. Closer look. Vigorous style. The rough texture of the rocks is accentuated by Cox's vigorous brushwork. He often painted on a kind of coarse wrapping paper that was well suited to his technique.